Video 2 for European history. All right, the growth of labor unions. I'm sorry, less radical. Actually, first, I have less radical. So how they're getting less radical. Several reasons for why they're becoming less radical. So I have three, but there are several reasons why they're becoming less radical, these socialist groups, by the turn of the century. Number one, workers had gained the right to vote, like in places like Britain we talked about. So suffrage increased. So workers had gained the right to vote and now could be in politics and were not ostracized anymore, if that's a big change. So number one is that workers had gained the right to vote, and so that made them more willing to be in the system because of that reason. And if they follow the process, they could achieve real tangible benefits. Number two, many responded positively to patriotic education and indoctrination. So many responded positively to patriotic education and indoctrination. So we talked about this already, that schools from a young age are pushing out their agenda, nationalism and folklore and history and culture, and that dilutes Marxist ideas, because Marx was like, all workers of the world will unite and overthrow governments and the bourgeoisie and proletariat and everything. I'm sorry, not proletariat, but bourgeoisie and the governments and everything else. And so that didn't really happen. While there were a lot of working class folks, they still identify with their state. And that's a big important difference, is that Marx thought that basically working classes wouldn't see a state, or like wouldn't see the need for a state, but these guys end up supporting their own home states. And so they were indoctrinated by early education from these countries. And the third reason is workers' standard of living grew better in the late 1800s. So after 1850, workers' standard of living grew steadily and quality of life improved, especially in urban areas. So after 1850, quality of life goes up, so does standard of living as well too, which makes them less likely to protest as well. So that's another change that happens. Okay, now growth of labor unions. Growth of labor unions. In early industrial revolution, unions were usually illegal. So as we talked about before, a lot of countries banned them, like the La Chapelier laws, and you also have the laws that are passed in Britain as well too in the early 1800s. So there's a lot of laws that ban unions' right to exist. They were considered very subversive. Britain kind of led the way whenever they allowed unions the right to meet in the 1820s. So Britain overturned their laws in the 20s, in the 1820s, and began to let unions meet. And so that kind of got the snowball rolling. Practical, localized unions began forming. So not like big national unions like the one Robert Owen tried to create in the 1830s, but very local, practical ones, like, let's get a union of craft workers or carpenters or whatever, and let them as a group fight for local change, not national or regional change, just, do well where they live. So a lot of practical, localized unions began forming in the 30s, mostly for skilled workers. So unskilled were left out, but for skilled workers, they're starting to form these unions. They worked on gaining better wages. And hours as well too. So they worked on getting better wages and hours. Also, the power of collective bargaining. You should remember that term from last year in U.S. history. But basically, collective bargaining is the right to unionize, the right to be a collective and bargain with your boss for change. So they're looking for better hours, better pay, as well as collective bargaining rights as a union. So this paved the way for full union acceptance in Britain in the 70s. This paved the way for full union acceptance in the 70s. And even later on, more unskilled worker unions begin to develop too. So unskilled workers develop their own unions as well in the 1800s. So labor unions get more accepted as time goes on. Okay, next you have Germany and unions. Germany became the most industrialized and unionized country by 1914. So Germany became the most unionized and most industrialized country by 1914. Unions got basic rights in 1869. So again, Bismarck time. Bismarck gives a lot of unions basic rights by 1869. They were harassed for a while whenever later on Bismarck tries to pass some anti-socialist laws we talked about. So in the later years, whenever Germany was united, they were harassed until the 1890s whenever Bismarck tried to control a lot of the unions with anti-socialist laws. But as we know, when Bismarck was kicked out, the new the new Kaiser Wilhelm II, removed a lot of those restrictions, and they grew in size as a result. In 1895, Germany only had about 250,000 people in unions out of 8 million male workers. So they only had 250,000 males in unions in the 1890s out of their 8 million male workers. Then the legal harassment ended, and membership jumped up. So by 1912, right before the war breaks out, you have about 3 million. So by 1912, you have about 3 million in the unions by that point. The reason for growth was due to focus on issues like hours, wages, and those kind of things, not revolution. So the reason why they actually got change to happen is because they focused more on reasons for growth like hours and wages and less than revolution. People responded better to that than revolution speak. Strikes and protests helped groups like the German Trade Union Congress. I don't have this up here, but an example of this is that strikes and protests helped groups like the German Trade Union Congress, the German Trade Union Congress, and other unions achieved their collective bargaining rights by 1913. So Germany is also migrating their way towards collective bargaining rights and union rights in the late 1800s and 1900s. So the German Trade Union Congress and other unions achieved collective bargaining rights by 1913. Okay, next I have revisionism. An effort by moderate socialists to update Marxist doctrines began to happen in the late 1800s. So like whenever he died, a lot of moderate socialists were like, all right, we need to kind of update this to make it seem not so harsh and revolutionary. Edward Bernstein, Edward spelled E-D-U-A-R-D, Bernstein, so like Bernstein, B-E-R-N-S-T-E-I-N. Edward Bernstein, this socialist, argued that many of Marxist predictions had been proven false, especially things like the revolution against the bourgeoisie, the working classes rising together and getting rid of the states. So Edward Bernstein argued that many of Marxist predictions had been proven false by this point. So he and others argued that socialists needed to reform their tactics to meet the changes of society and reality. So he argued that socialists needed to reform their tactics to better meet these changes. The German Socialist Party and the Second International denounced these views, but the ideas gained support. So the German Socialist Party and the Second International denounced some of that rhetoric, but it's still happening anyway at that time. All right, and then I have pre-1914. So socialist policies varied country to country, but socialism was largely nationalized by 1914, meaning like there were parties and people who were in office and voting for things that were socialist. So socialist policies varied country to country, but socialism was largely nationalized by 1914. So Germany had a socialist party, and even though Bismarck tried to limit their power, he still passed socialist policies to kind of make people not support them. Britain had a Labour Party develop. You had the Russian Socialist Party. So all these guys are having socialist parties develop. France has one too. So it was gaining support and becoming more nationalized and normalized. This explains why when the war came in 1914, almost all socialist leaders and most workers supported their national governments, which also proves Marx wrong. So because these socialist ideas became tied into nationalism, especially because people supported their country, going to school and getting educated, when the wars broke out, socialists were in favor of supporting their countries going to war, not breaking off and being one united working class group of the world, like the proletariat, like Marx had thought of. And so they turned away from international solidarity to help each other out as a result. Okay. So last few things on this slide, and I think I'll try to finish the slide up real quick, then I'll go on to one more video. So I have some women as socialist leaders. These women are going to be influential at the turn of the century, around World War I as well too. But there are a couple of leaders who are tied to socialism you want to be aware of. The first is Clara Zetkin. Clara, C-L-A-R-A, Zetkin, Z-E-T-K-I-N. This is her right here. So Zetkin in Germany, she became a leading advocate of Marxism. So she was German, but a pro-Marxist. She was impatient with the limited roles of women in bourgeoisie society. So she was impatient with limited roles for women in bourgeois society. So she was impatient with the limited roles of women in bourgeois society. She felt more drawn to labor movement and workers' rights. So she felt more drawn, more so than women's issues, to like the labor movement and workers' rights. In 1878, she joined the German Socialist Workers' Party. So in 1878, she joined the German Socialist Workers' Party that we've been talking about. She also supported women's suffrage. So like her main thing was fighting for workers' rights, but she was also a woman suffragette in Germany. She also helped edit a socialist newspaper. So she joined the German Socialist Workers' Party, and she also supported women's suffrage and edited a socialist newspaper. She was also a strong supporter of international workers' movements. So Zetkin was also a strong supporter of international workers' movements. She opposed nationalism, so she is kind of more Marxist in that way. She opposed nationalism, and she openly resisted the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany in the 30s. So in the 30s, she's still alive, and she openly resists the rise of the Nazi Party. She herself becomes a member of the German Communist Party in the 20s and 30s. But she is someone who stands out in protest against the rise of the Nazis in that time period. And the last lady you have is Rosa Luxemburg. Rosa, spelled like it sounds. Luxemburg is Luxemburg. Rosa Luxemburg. She was very famous in the socialist movement. She was born in Poland, but active in many different places. So she was Polish, but she was active in various places. She fled to Switzerland to avoid getting arrested, and later to Germany. So she fled to Switzerland to avoid getting arrested, and later to Germany. So she fled to Switzerland to avoid getting arrested from Poland, because she became active in her teens. She goes to Switzerland to avoid getting arrested, and then later goes to Germany to get away from being arrested in Switzerland. She also eventually joined the German Communist Party, so the same party that Zetkin joined. So she also later joins the German Communist Party. She was a very dramatic speaker who believed workers should take up arms against repressive governments. She was a very dramatic speaker who believed workers should take up arms against a repressive government. So she's a bit more radical, more revolutionary. So she's a dramatic speaker who believed workers should take up arms against repressive governments. In 1914, she organized what was called the Spartacus League. Spartacus, Spartacus, which was a radical socialist group. It was part of the failed German Revolution of 1918-1919. So her Spartacus group, or Spartacus League, tried to overthrow Germany kind of a la Russia style with a socialist revolution, but it failed in 1918-1919 whenever World War I was failing and the war was ending in Germany. So she was executed in a wave of anti-communist violence. So she, along with many others, were executed in Germany against all this violent communist and socialist uprising. So we'll stop video 2.